Hi, I'm Dave Klein, and this is the Simulate Cybersecurity Newscast. A new vulnerability in Openssl was announced this week, and some people are calling it the worst vulnerability since Heartbleed. Heartbleed was the terrible vulnerability back in 2014 that affected millions and millions of Openssl deployments worldwide. It's the most popular crypto software that's used by people and in applications out there. The jury's out on that, but let me tell you what it is. So basically, x86 processors from 2016 all the way through to late 2021 come with this thing called AVX512. It's advanced vector extensions for the x86 processors. And what this is when you get your processor, it comes with microcode that is used to run it. This is an example of an optional set of code that sits in there that could be called upon almost like a library to run various things. And the problem is a heap overflow. So what's a heap overflow? So let's say this is your heap. You're a programmer and you create a heap, which is a series of storage memory that could be used for certain functions and things like that. Heap overflow is when you overwrite the heap and can still write into the code itself. Thus, you can use it to hack if you want to be mean and that kind of thing. So that's what it is. And so there's a manual fix for this that's on Opensssl's GitHub site. On top of that, there is going to be a fix coming out, Openssl 3.05. I think the big takeaway for me is when you think of keeping things up to date and looking for your vulnerabilities and where you are susceptible for attacks, it's so important to include your crypto, right? For things like this, right? And as time goes on, we'll get into quantum computing. It'll be all sorts of things that could attack legacy versions of crypto. So as part of your asset management, as part of your testing, you got to include that crypto stack. Just when IE has been end of life and we've gotten rid of that train wreck, some issues with the new Microsoft Edge browser in this situation on how they manage vulnerabilities. Davey Winder in Forbes wrote an article on this and some things that he was investigating. Basically, the new Microsoft Edge is a Chromium-based browser. It's used by 150 million users worldwide. The first used browser is Chrome, then comes Microsoft Edge, then you have Apple Safari, mostly because of devices like this, and then Firefox. But here's the point. With Microsoft Edge, they often get to patching 48 hours later than when Chrome patches. That gives you about 48 hours more of an attack vector than you get with Chrome. And on top of that, often what they do is they take the high-level CVEs that Google puts out and then make a secondary determination on what is important and not. And they actually downgrade what they choose to downgrade. And so the challenge here is almost like, if I was speeding in my car and I pulled over and I tell the cop, hey, listen, I'm a nice guy and I'm safe, it doesn't make a difference. I'm still speeding. And so for me, the challenge here is Microsoft shouldn't be able to downgrade vulnerabilities and only fix ones that they want. To me, that's a challenge. So between the 48-hour delay that you get by adding Microsoft browser to the stack, as well as the fact that they can pick and choose because they're Microsoft, is really a problem for me. So I guess my big takeaway here is in your gold images, in your standardization, in your enterprises, stick with Chrome, stick with Firefox. So you've heard me talk a lot about the fact that no one should run their own Microsoft Exchange instances anymore, and that they should move to the cloud in a managed Exchange environment because there's no reason not to, and it's much more secure. This week, the US CISA has required all US agencies by October 1st to do something else besides being in the cloud. They say that you need to enable modern Microsoft authentication and multi-factor authentication by, again, October 1st. And they also, in the mandate, mention private sector and say, private sector, you should do this as well. So what is this all about? They came out with some research that showed that Microsoft legacy authentication is behind more than 99% of password spray attacks, 97% of credential stuffing attacks, and that the number of these attacks are nearly 921 a second. Think about that, 921 attacks against Exchange authentication every second. That's nearly double the frequency over the last 12 months. And they also found that Active Directory AD accounts that have disabled legacy authentication experience 67% fewer compromises than those with legacy authentication. So this directive comes out with some serious teeth. So again, go ahead and enable modern authentication and multi-factor authentication, whether you're a US government entity or not. I'll put a link to the directive, which actually has a very helpful guide to take you through that. A follow-up on the Okta attack by Lapsus ransomware gang. A very interesting story. So, I talk a lot about enterprises and how they need to disclose in an accurate fashion and be transparent after a breach. Well, Okta did a pretty good job, but I thought that the follow-up was wonderful and even better. So Brett Winterford, their Asia Pac and Japan CISO, was in front of the Gartner Risk and Security Summit in Sydney, Australia, and discussed the attack at greater length. And what was really neat is he talked about it being a testament to zero trust. And I'd argue he's kind of right in this situation. So well done by them. Let's talk about it. So if you remember, the breach was caused by a third-party customer support group that they no longer use called Cytle. And the attacker got into Cytle and then from there was able to get into some consoles. Well, he got into a little bit more about how they handle this. So first things first, they were able to detect the fact that someone was asking for a password reset from Cytle, and it was outside the expected IP range, and they failed to do multi-factor authentication. So they immediately sent an alert to Cytle to suspend that user, and they notified the administration over at Cytle. And beyond that, when the attack occurred, apparently they also had gotten into other parts of Cytle, into a thin client in which they had administrative access to monitor consoles. So they were able to see various things, but when they would try to interact with the environments, multi-factor authentication came in and blocked them. So what they did is they waited till the administrator was away from his or her desk, took some screenshots that we see that were very famous in the Twitter thing that Lapsus put out. But the thing was they weren't able to actually to interact with things. So I think it was actually a very interesting disclosure. I'm going to put a link to that disclosure and some of the things that he said. Quite interesting. And what they said also was very interesting. To improve, they said they made some expensive but necessary changes because they're going for reactions that are hours instead of 2 and 3 weeks. Very interesting. And that's the newscast for the week. I'm Dave Klein. This has been the Cybersecurity Newscast. Have a great and safe week.